You practice with tools until you're familiar before you do something serious with them.
Hello, and welcome to the Arts of Language podcast with Andrew Pudewa, founder of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, or as many like to say, IEW. My name is Julie Walker, and I'm honored to serve Andrew and IEW as the Chief Marketing Officer. Our goal is to equip teachers and teaching parents with methods and materials which will aid them in training their students to become confident and competent communicators and thinkers. So, Andrew, last week, we left our listeners sitting on the edge of a cliff. Okay, not probably literally true.
Well, we didn't finish what we started. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that is good because it causes people to want to hear the rest of the story.
Right. But it also is a difficult time for listeners to jump in. If they didn't hear last week, we discussed some of the myths of our stylistic syllabus.
Or misunderstandings.
Misunderstandings, yes, you qualified that as misunderstandings. And we ended with the fourth one. So look back on the show notes if you want to know what 1, 2, and 3 are. The fourth one, which is a misunderstanding that banned words are always banned. And banned words are used both for strong verbs and quality adjectives, which is a dress-up that we haven't talked about yet. But can we just jump right in there?
Yeah, sure. I have received a few letters over the years of, I would say, educated, professional people, either writers or teachers who are writers or writers who also teach, seriously questioning whether the word said should be banned. And one of the reasons that they have this question or objection is that children will then read good literature. Mm-hmm. C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia, Tolkien, or any number of other things, and they will discover the word said in those books and then have some kind of conclusion that, oh no, Tolkien and Lewis must not be good writers because they're using a banned word. Mm-hmm. So I have never had a child say that to me personally, but I've had a couple teachers say that they had students say that to them, or not even teaching our syllabus, but having heard that a child said that to someone that they heard. So, I think that's worth addressing because there are times when I've been writing stuff, and quite honestly, the word go was the best word to use. Mm-hmm. But I also thought, are there options? The word said, I have used it. It doesn't mean it's good or bad. The question is, in that sentence, according to my best judgment, is it the best word there? So that's what we're trying to bring kids to, that point of questioning, is this word that I'm about to write the best option? Now, if you never practice not using it, then it's the default. But if you have practiced not using it, like the running with weights analogy we did last week, then, okay, where's my list of words? There's 500 substitutes for the word said. Not all of them are going to work in anything, but some of them would work in some cases and might not work in other cases. Right. So it's all about that wrestling for the right word.
Right.
And so creating the banned words list, starting with the verbs and getting rid of half a dozen of them, it helps kids move to that, okay, I'm going to swim around in the world of options to these words. And then we move into the next stylistic technique, which is the because clause. So we're back into combining ideas. And then we move to the quality adjective, which is where we then say, all right, what's the difference verb-adjective? And, that's one of the points I've noticed kids when I look at them having written their paragraph and underlining their dress-ups or in the middle of a class, they will confuse verbs and adjectives, which is not surprising to me because of the nature of English being a non-inflected language. So an inflected language is when a word has an ending that almost always indicates exactly what part of speech it is.
Oh, okay.
So in Latin or Japanese, which are the two languages I know a little bit about, if you look at a word, you would see the ending and say, well, that's a verb. Has to be a verb. Can't be anything but a verb, right? But in English, think of a simple little verb or a simple word like golf. 4-letter word, 1 syllable, but it could be 3 different things. It could be a verb. We golf every month.
We don't, but...
No. It could be a noun. Golf is boring. It could be an adjective. Hand me the golf club. Get in the golf cart. So for a child to just look at that word and know what it is, nobody could do that. You would have to parse the sentence. So English is, in a way, one of the harder languages to figure out parts of speech just because we have these huge overlaps.
Right.
And it gets even nastier when we start sticking INGs on verbs, and then they behave in many different possible ways.
Right, right.
So it's good. It's good that we have strong verb and quality adjective on the dress-up checklist because it forces that conversation. In this case, what part of speech is this?
Right.
Is it something that someone is doing, or is it a person, place, thing, or idea?
Right.
But that's kind of abstract, even for kids, 9, 10 years old. So this just helps. So having the checklist is, in a way, the best way to reinforce basic parts of speech and grammar ideas.
Right, exactly.
And then adjectives are used, whereas ly adverbs can jump all around in a sentence. Adjectives are generally used in one of two ways. As kind of a pure adjective, which would come before a noun. And I don't really like the word modify because it makes you think it's changing it somehow. But it comes before a noun and adds information to
Clarity,
that noun.
Perhaps.
Clarity.
It should be a clarifier, not a modifier.
Yeah, or just a stronger image or feeling. It creates a stronger image or feeling. Or it can be used as a predicate. Adjective, right? Such as exercise is good, right? So anyway, I have found so many opportunities to teach grammar at the point of need, as Mrs. Ingham always has said, and almost surreptitiously.
Yep.
Because it's just constantly coming up, and you can constantly reinforce those ideas. And the banned words list with adjectives does the same. It's a little harder to get rid of adjectives because once you get rid of good and bad and maybe big and small and maybe cool, and sometimes you really want to get rid of awesome, not because it's weak, lame, lousy, but because it's overused and misused.
Right.
But so we come up with, a few of those to sensitize. So you can't say good, you can't say bad. Okay, what are some options? Well, there's hundreds of options. And now the challenge is to choose the one that fits your use, right? So you could say tasty, right? Okay. So, ice cream is good. Ice cream is delicious. Ice cream is tasty. Ice cream is, what else could you say?
Essential
Refreshing,
to life.
satisfying. But you could say, the roller coaster was a good ride. It was a good thing. Well, you wouldn't use tasty.
No.
Right? So you'd look for something else. Well, maybe exhilarating. Okay, well, I suppose you could say ice cream is exhilarating. It wouldn't be horrible. It would just be hyperbole. But so kids are they're navigating the world of these words, and they don't understand the nuance of all the words that they have heard. And in a way, you best learn the meaning of a word by wrestling with how to use it,
right?
Rather than just reading stuff or hearing it,
right?
Or memorizing a definition and then forgetting that as soon as the quiz is over.
Right. I find, and I know you've actually said this, kids are so correctable. They can use the wrong word to describe something, the tasty roller coaster, and you can say, no, that doesn't quite fit. Use something different. And they're no problem. There's no problem with that. Oh, exhilarating. Oh, that's much better.
Yeah. In my talk on the 4 deadly errors of teaching writing, I point out one of the most useless things you could ever say to a student, especially a younger one, is, can't you think of a better word here? Because honestly, the kid is like, if I could have thought of a better word, I would have thought of a better word.
Sure.
If you don't like it, just tell me what you do want.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's all part of that modeling and teaching and honing and refining, and it takes time. It takes years. And so, in this conversation about myths or misunderstandings of style techniques, we could also address the problem of, doing these causes awkwardness in writing.
Yes.
That, and I
Myth number 5.
oftentimes see, adults or young people say, well, I could write this better if I didn't have a checklist. Okay, well, maybe that's true. What they're really saying is this would be less awkward if I weren't forced to do these 5 things or 7 things or 10 things or however many are on the checklist. Well, that may be true. But I do like to use the music analogy, right? So we talked last week about running with weights,
yes.
which I think is a very good analogy. You could expand that to, say, dribble drills. In soccer or basketball. You don't do dribble drills so that you can go show people you're dribbling.
Right.
It's not the end. The end is to be a better player in a game, on the field, on the court. But the dribble drill is a means to that higher end.
Right.
And so we're looking at the same thing. So I like the music analogy as well. We don't play the scales and etudes so that we can just show off scales and etudes. Nobody's really thrilled to hear that. But we do know that if a student plays a scale or an arpeggio or a particular etude, they develop a comfortability, if not an actual mastery, of particular techniques. Then, when later, down the line, when they want to play something, it's like, oh, I know how to do that.
Right.
Same thing with the writing. And so I try to make this as clear as possible. And I will tell you, I'm pretty sure that all of the people who have written to me criticizing the use of banned words, because, of course, the kid who learns that said is a banned word now thinks C.S. Lewis is a bad writer because C.S. Lewis used said or good, right? Those people have not actually sat through the whole seminar.
Right. Yeah.
So they're not getting the full understanding of the philosophy of why and how to do this. But I try to make it very clear. The goal of the checklist is to graduate from it, not to do it the rest of your life.
Right.
Now, I haven't quite convinced Dr. Webster of this truth.
I was wondering if you were going to bring that up.
Because anytime I send him anything written by anyone, he's like counting all the dress-ups, openers, decorations, and is this following the checklist perfectly? And if not, okay, that's the first point of criticism.
Well, and speaking of someone who's known and lived this for decades, which we talked about last week, he has certainly been, 7 decades of structure and style?
Yeah, probably close to it.
Yeah.
6 at least. And I understand his attitude as a purist. He's also 92 years old, so. But I am very aware that the goal is to graduate from the weights or the dribble drills or the checklist. You reach a certain point where you don't need to do those exercises anymore.
Right.
Because you have accomplished the goal of the exercise.
Right. Exactly.
Then you can go and do what you want to.
Right. This is almost ridiculous to say this, but I feel like I need to say it to illustrate this point. You mentioned earlier, Andrew Pudewa, I believe you've considered yourself able to graduate from the checklist, wouldn't you say?
Well, yes, but sometimes I have to write stuff
Right.
that does everything, and I can.
Right. And of course, that's including when you write to Dr. Webster.
Yeah, especially.
But, you know, what you said earlier about choosing the best word, and, it gives you pause. Maybe good. Is there a different word that I could use instead of good? Because good is a banned word. Nope. It is truly the best word. And at least you've stopped to think about it.
Exactly.
Where kids that don't have that instruction wouldn't think to do that. And they wouldn't go, well, you know what? Good isn't the best word. Exhilarating really gives that strong image or feeling that I want to be able to convey to my reader when I was writing the Matterhorn Mountain at Disneyland, which is exhilarating.
I heard they're going to shut down the Matterhorn.
That will make me very sad.
Of course. And I couldn't care less. However, the thing that I try to make clear in the very beginning is that the whole purpose of the checklist is to graduate from it.
Yeah.
It's like school. The whole purpose of school isn't to be in school forever. The purpose of school is to graduate from school and get on with your life. Any college student will tell you that.
Right, right.
And so it's a little bit of a paradigm shift. And then, the kids, they want to play with it. So if you say, okay, good is a banned word, then pretty soon, if you live with these children, they're going to catch you every time you accidentally say good.
Okay, there's myth number 6 that you just said, and that is kids will catch you saying a banned word when actually banned words apply to writing.
Right. And this is a good lesson for all of us, but in particular for young writers, to realize that there's spoken English, which for the most part, everyone's experience is it's somewhat accidental and informal. When you're just talking to someone, you say stuff the way you think at first. You don't necessarily have the time in the middle of a conversation to think what you're going to say, rehearse it in your head a bit, wonder if you would change it to make it a little more accurate or stylish or literary or sophisticated. No, you're just talking. But when you're writing, it's a different thing. I mentioned last week that I don't like the idea that if you can write, if you can talk, you can write. That's haphazard, that's sloppy. That there's a discipline to writing. In fact, I will quote, I think I have quoted on the podcast before, but I just love it. It's an absolute perfect understanding of the language arts. And that's when Francis Bacon says, reading maketh a full man, speaking maketh a ready man, and writing maketh an exact man. And so, yes, if kids are in, say, debate, and they have to stand up and formulate an argument very quickly, it wouldn't be as close to perfect as it would be if they wrote it. But there's that readiness, there's that speed. And whether it's a formal debate like, a competition, or whether it's a debate with a parent or a friend or a conversation, the ability to speak well is essentially speed of connecting your full database of language options with the idea you're trying to articulate almost instantaneously. And we respect that greatly.
Yes.
We respect people who have a vocabulary and a range of expression and a depth of thought that is, the achievement of a life lived so far.
Right.
But that writing makes an exact man, okay, this is the idea. Now, can this be said even better? And, I'm reminded of this supposedly Oscar Wilde wrote in a letter to his friend. You've heard me say this. I spent the morning editing one of my poems. I put in a comma. This afternoon, I took it out. That the refinement level that he was striving for was such that he was thinking for hours about whether a particular line should have a comma or not. So that kind of shows the extreme level of precision, of exactness.
Yes.
But what we also know is that as kids improve their vocabulary in writing, it starts to show up in their speaking as well.
Exactly. And then we could launch into the whole talk about the value of poetry memorization, of memorizing famous speeches, because that memorized repertoire can inform the writing that can then in turn form the formal or even casual speaking. And I've been in situations, and I know you have, but you're the professional talker. I'm just like the sidekick, right? Whatever it is. But I'll be in situations where people will say, Julie, what's the word for this? What's the definition of this? And apparently I am speaking with friends and peers, and my vocabulary is a little more expanded. I hope so. I hope you're rubbing off on me a little bit. I hope my training here at the Institute for Excellence in Writing is actually informing my speaking too.
But I have that same experience listening to two really smart people having a conversation. And you just kind of stop and think, how do they do that?
Right.
How do they know all those words? How do they have all that information at their fingertips? So, we're all on a spectrum there.
Yep.
But our work, of course, is to use the tools that we have been given and have worked with and practiced with. And essentially, we've written, I would say, an instruction book for using language tools that is particularly helpful.
Yes.
Pretty much everyone. I mean, I honestly have not met anyone who's been through the whole course and taught children and didn't say, wow, this has been very useful for me personally.
Yes.
It's improved my own writing.
Yes.
And I've even heard that from very, very professional people who wrote for a living and said, well, this is helpful because it's showing me other ways to do things and I fall into ruts and habits like that.
Exactly.
So, I would address the people who have an idea that somehow these banned words or these style techniques create a misuse or a lack of appropriateness or an undue awkwardness, to say, understand the reasons, understand children, and you will understand that this does what we hope it will do. And we've seen that. How many kids have gone off to college, taking university classes, and then they say to their mom or their old teacher, I still use my blah, 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 blah from IEW.
Checklist,
now,
portable wall, some other tools
do they
that they brought with them.
Everything? No, I doubt it. And I try to say, look, when you go to college, don't try to write well. Try to figure out what your professor likes and do that. And if you have this big repertoire of stylistic techniques to choose from, you could actually analyze someone's writing and get closer to imitating it, which seems like cheating, but I mean, aren't we all about that, though?
Right.
The first rule of rhetoric is communicate with your audience. Who's your audience?
Right.
So I like to, try and help teachers and children understand that in practicing all these style techniques, dress-ups, okay, you got them down. Let's move into sentence openers. Here's a couple sentence openers you would almost never use when you're speaking. Only when you write it, it sounds more literary. It sounds more sophisticated.
You sound smarter than you actually are, perhaps.
And what better way to become smarter than you previously were than to practice trying to be smarter?
Right. I remember the line that you say when you're doing a teacher training course. You say, I do not believe, nor do I teach. And I know you know the line, so I'm going to let you finish it.
That this is the formula for good writing. And that's how I introduce the whole stylistic technique.
Exactly.
So this is not a formula for good writing. So we'll finish with this last misunderstanding. And that is the idea that if everyone follows the same checklist, they all will sound the same. And you get this mechanical, uninspired, unindividual writing.
Formulaic.
Well, it's just not true. I mean, you've sat with me. You've actually sat through all the classes and all the videos that we've recorded over the past 3-4 years.
Multiple times.
And what always strikes me, and I know it strikes you, is you can give the same source text or the same assignment with the same checklist to 12 different kids, and they are not limited in their creativity in any way. It's like if you gave the same box of building materials or the same package of Legos or the same kit with art supplies or whatever.
Yeah, this isn't a recipe where you're trying to follow a recipe so that you can replicate a cake or a casserole.
Not at all.
It's not that at all. It's just
No.
it's not even a list of ingredients. It's
And
very
the
different.
variety that we get, both with the younger children and with the older children, even though they're all doing the same assignment with the same checklist, it always astounds me. And so, we want to be sure to help everyone understand there is no danger
No.
in teaching this,
Right.
that all kids are going to sound the same.
Right.
And then understanding that once they leave your control, they may or may not use the things on the checklist.
Right.
Or maybe if they stay with you for long enough, you say, okay, I think you've got it. You're free. Do what you want.
Right.
Make the best thing you can.
Right.
And don't worry about the checklist.
Right.
And then they can pick and choose.
Right.
And they can use the style techniques that are going to work for that particular idea at that particular time and not be forced to put in a thing that's just going to be awkward.
Right.
And that's when you really just, you have achieved the goal. You see how wonderful the path was that got you there. And then you go off and do whatever you do in real life. Write emails or memos or children's books or papers or technical manuals. Everybody's going to go off and do different things. And I think one of the biggest problems is adults have in their mind somewhere this ideal of good writing. Journalists, for example, have an ideal of good writing. But you wouldn't apply that to teaching children in 4th grade because you're not trying to make 10-year-olds into journalists. I always like to say, my goal is to get children to fall in love with the language and play with it.
Yes.
Because you got a room full of 4th graders. Some of them may go into journalism, but some of them may want to write children's books like Alexander's No Good, Horrible, Awful, Terrible, Miserable. I don't know the title, but everyone knows that book. It's ridiculous, but it's funny. It's engaging.
It was written by an author who had a banned word list with bad, and they came up with awful, no good, horrible.
Well, maybe they did. Maybe that's true. Maybe it isn't. I don't know. But my point is, you as an adult cannot take your concept of this is professionally what is good because it's in a field, right? You don't write an article for a magazine the way you write a children's book.
Right.
Does that mean no one should ever write children's books? Of course not. And in fact, the more you know, the more flexibility you have, the wider the range of usage that you can wrangle, the more likely you are to function better if you're asked to write an article or a summary or an email or a blog post or a poem or a children's book or a reflection. All of those things are going to be different. But the pieces, the tools that help you do all of those things well are in the experience. They're in your brain. You have them. So that's why, and I wrote an article in response to the criticism from a journalist that adding in dress-ups doesn't make writing better. And I said, I'm not teaching future journalists. I'm teaching children. And as Maria Montessori said, the work of a child is to play. And that's how they learn to use, and going back, topic clincher to the last episode's first idea, tools.
Right.
And Dorothy Sayers wrote about this too.
Right.
You know, you practice with tools until you're familiar before you do something serious with them. Another analogy I've used is my job is not to carve a journalist out of a kid, but to give the kid the linguistic marble, as much of it as possible. And then, if that's their calling or destiny, someone else gets to carve it and say, do this, but don't do that. I want the kid to walk in with the greatest aptitude, which would be, I love words. Okay, now let's refine that for a professional usage as an adult.
Yes. Yes. Just one really quick story. I know we have to end, and it's not even a story. It's just an anecdotal evidence of what you're saying is true. I love to watch kids at the beginning of the year grow up and then at the end of the year say, I want to be a writer. Where at the beginning of the class, you said, how many of you hate writing? And their hand was up. They hate writing. And at the end of the year, I want to be a writer. Wow, that's a powerful gift that you are giving, Andrew, and that this structure and style syllabus can afford to these students. So thank you for all the kids out there that are succeeding in college.
It's wonderful to have done this long enough now to have so many stories coming in of, you know, adult kids, you know, in their 20s, in careers, even 30 years old, who were in a writing class or watched a video of mine 15 years ago when they were young.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. It's been a joy working with you. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, you can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, or just visit us each week at iew.com/podcast. Until then, on behalf of Andrew Pudewa and the team at IEW, I thank you for allowing us to partner with you on your journey toward better listening, speaking, reading, writing, and thinking.